Every night at 9 o'clock, my daughter-in-law calls me and asks the same question. How are you doing, Dad? You eating okay? You taking your medication? I used to think it was sweet. A young woman checking in on her father-in-law, all the way out here in rural Kentucky, where the nearest neighbor is half a mile down a gravel road. I used to tell my wife Loretta about those calls, back when she could still hear me. I'd sit on the porch steps and say, "See? Gwen's not so bad after all." And Loretta would just give me that look, the one with the half smile that meant she heard me but wasn't quite agreeing. Loretta passed 2 years ago last March. Pancreatic cancer, 6 weeks from diagnosis to the end. The doctor said it was fast, and I suppose that was meant to be a comfort. I haven't found it to be one. After she died, the calls from Gwen got more frequent. Every night, 9 o'clock sharp, I started to count on them, if I'm honest. There's something about that age. I turned 68 this past September, where the silence of an empty house can get so loud it hurts. The television helps some, the dog helps more. But a human voice, even one I'd never fully warmed to, was something. "You sound tired, Dad." "I'm okay, Gwen. You need anything?" Shane and I could drive up this weekend. Shane is my son, my only child. He married Gwen 11 years ago at a small ceremony in Lexington, and I shook her father's hand and told him what a lucky family we all were. I meant it then. I'm not sure when I stopped meaning it. The thing about Gwen is that she's never done anything wrong in a way you could point to clearly. She's sharp, always dressed right, always says the right thing at the right moment. My sister used to call that kind slippery, the kind that leaves you feeling unsettled without knowing exactly why. I told myself I was imagining things. Then, about 8 months after Loretta's funeral, Gwen started mentioning the property. Not directly, not at first. She'd work it in sideways. "Dad, have you thought about what you're going to do with all that land long term? Or, it must be a lot to manage on your own, the house and everything." Or the one that started getting under my skin, "Shane and I have been talking about how we could help you simplify things." Simplify. That word. Our land has been in my family since my grandfather cleared the first field in 1931, 82 acres outside of Harlan County, Kentucky. There's a creek that runs along the east property line and a stand of white oak trees on the ridge that I used to take Shane to see when he was small. I'd put my hand on one of those old trunks and tell him, "This tree was here before your great-grandfather was born." He'd look up at the branches like they were something holy. That land is not something I've ever thought about simplifying. But I let it go. I kept telling myself Gwen meant well. Shane seemed happy. What right did I have to stir things up? The calls kept coming, 9 o'clock every night, and the property came up more and more. Always framed as concern, always framed as help. Then about 4 months ago, she asked me to sign something. It was a Tuesday. She called a little earlier than usual, around 8:30. And she said her cousin was a notary and they were coming through Harlan County that Saturday anyway, and wouldn't it be convenient if I just signed a financial power of attorney, just temporary, just to help manage things if I ever had a health episode and couldn't handle the bills myself. "It's just a precaution, Dad, for your protection." I said I'd think about it. I told myself I was overthinking. I'm a retired school teacher. 31 years teaching history at Harlan County High School. I know how to read a room and I know when something feels off. But I also know I've been lonely. I know grief does things to a man's reasoning. I kept giving Gwen the benefit of the doubt because the alternative, that my son's wife was running some kind of play on a 68-year-old widower, felt too ugly to sit with. 2 weeks later, she asked again. Then again the week after that. Each time I said I'd think about it, each time she got a little less warm about accepting that answer. The last Saturday of October, I was out on the back porch early in the morning drinking coffee and watching the mist come off the creek. Loretta used to love that. She'd wrap her hands around her mug and say the farm looked like a painting before 8 a.m. I still have her favorite mug, the one with the blue morning glories on it. I don't use it. I just take it down sometimes and hold it. I'd been out there maybe 20 minutes when I noticed the back barn door was sitting open. I hadn't been in that barn in weeks, not since I'd moved some of Loretta's things there after the funeral. Boxes of her school yearbooks, her mother's dishes, a cedar chest she'd kept since she was a girl. I'm not sentimental in a dramatic way, but I hadn't been ready to go through any of it. I went to close the door and realized the padlock was broken. Not broken like it had rusted through. Broken like it had rusted through. Broken like someone had forced it. I stood there for a long moment. Then I went in. Most of Loretta's things were just as I'd left them, but the cedar chest, the one she'd had since before we met, the one her mother had given her when she turned 16, it had been opened. I could tell because the small brass clasp that stuck slightly on the left side was sitting flush, and Loretta had always left it slightly raised because she didn't like forcing it. Someone had been in that chest. I sat down on the edge of an old workbench and stayed there a while. The barn smelled like dust and old wood and something faintly sweet from the hay bales stacked along the back wall. I breathed through it. Then I opened the chest myself. Inside was what I remembered, Loretta's grandmother's quilt, folded careful, some letters tied with kitchen twine, a small Bible with her maiden name written in the front cover, her mother's handwriting, and underneath all of that, a flat manila envelope I had never seen before. I don't know how long I stood holding it before I opened it. Inside were 3 documents. The first was a letter, handwritten in Loretta's careful, looping script, dated about 4 months before she got sick, before any of us knew she was sick. My love, it started. If you're reading this, then I wasn't able to say it to you in person. I need you to know something that I should have told you sooner. And I'm sorry. I found out some things about Gwen and I didn't tell you because I was afraid of what it would do to you and to Shane. I didn't want to believe it at first. I kept thinking I must be wrong. But I wrote it all down, and I put it in here because I needed someone to know, and you're the one person I trust. I had to stop reading. I set the letter down on the quilt, and I walked to the barn door and looked out at the back field for a while. There was a red-tailed hawk sitting on the fence post at the far corner, perfectly still. Then I went back and I read the rest. Loretta had found documents. She hadn't gone looking for them. She'd found them by accident, 2 years before she died, when she'd been helping Gwen reorganize files at the house in Lexington for a move. She'd come across a folder that wasn't labeled, and inside were what looked like property assessments on our Harlan County land, comparable sales, zoning notes, a draft letter, not signed, but in Gwen's handwriting, addressed to a development company out of Louisville. Gwen had been researching selling our land, not after we died, while we were alive, without our knowledge. The second document in the envelope was a copy Loretta had made of that draft letter. The third was a printout of a Kentucky state statute on financial elder abuse and power of attorney fraud, with several paragraphs highlighted in yellow marker. My wife, my quiet, careful, morning glory mug wife, had known something was coming. She hadn't known exactly what shape it would take, but she prepared for it, and she'd left it for me to find. I sat in that barn for a long time. The 9 o'clock call came that night as usual. "How are you, Dad? You eating okay?" "I'm okay, Gwen. We've been thinking, if you sign that power of attorney before the end of the year, it would make things so much simpler for taxes. We could even come up this weekend, make a little visit out of it." "That sounds nice," I said. "Let's plan on it." She sounded pleased. I hung up and sat in the dark kitchen for a while. The dog, an old beagle named Cooper, put his chin on my knee. I scratched his ears and thought about Loretta's letter. I thought about how she'd been carrying that by herself all those months while she was getting sicker. I thought about Shane. Shane, my son who used to hold on to my hand in the grocery store when he was 4 years old because he was scared of the automatic doors. My son who cried at my father's funeral even though he'd only been 11 and barely knew him because he understood even then that some losses are permanent. I didn't want to believe he was part of this. I still don't want to believe it even now, but I needed to know. I called my brother-in-law the next morning. Loretta's brother, Owen, who lives over in Barberville and spent 30 years as a county clerk before he retired. Owen is the most practical man I know. He doesn't panic and he doesn't waste words. I told him what I'd found. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Don't sign anything. Don't say anything different than you've been saying, and let me make some calls." Owen knew an attorney in Middlesboro who handles elder law. A woman named, well, I won't use her name here, but she'd handled exactly this kind of case before. She said the draft letter Loretta had copied was significant, especially combined with the repeated requests for power of attorney and the broken padlock on the barn. "Someone's been looking for those documents," she said. "That's the piece that changes this from suspicious to serious." I thought about that padlock. Someone had driven up that county road and broken into my barn while I was. Where? At the grocery store? At Owen's house for Sunday dinner? I thought about Gwen's calls, 9 o'clock every night, asking how I was doing, asking if I was home, asking if I'd eaten. She wasn't checking on me. She was tracking me, making sure she knew my patterns, making sure she knew when I'd be gone. I drove to Lexington that Thursday and sat across a desk from the attorney and laid out everything Loretta had left me. She looked through the documents carefully and then looked at me over her reading glasses. "Your wife was a smart woman," she said. "Yes," I said. She was. That weekend, Gwen and Shane drove up just like we'd planned. I made coffee and set out some of Loretta's shortbread cookies from the tin I'd kept in the freezer. The three of us sat at the kitchen table, and I let Gwen carry the conversation, which she was always good at. She talked about their new furniture, about a trip they were thinking of taking, about how the property taxes on land like this were only going to go up. Then she put the power of attorney paperwork on the table. I looked at it for a moment. Then I said, "I appreciate you driving all this way." I looked at my son. He was sitting with his hands wrapped around his coffee cup, not quite meeting my eyes. "Shane," I said, "did you know your mother found this paperwork? A draft letter to the development company in Louisville?" The color left his face. Gwen started to say something, but I put my hand up. "I found what your mother left me in the cedar chest," I said, still looking at Shane. "She kept it safe in case I needed it. She always was better at planning ahead than I was." What happened next, I don't need to describe in great detail. There was a lot of talking. Some of it was loud. Shane cried, and that was the hardest part. Watching my son sit at his mother's kitchen table and cry. He said he hadn't known about the draft letter. He said Gwen had told him the power of attorney was just a precaution, that he believed her, that he hadn't asked enough questions because he hadn't wanted to. I believe part of that. Maybe most of it. I don't know exactly how much my son understood about what his wife was doing. I may never know for certain. That's something I've had to make a kind of uneasy peace with. Gwen did not cry. She got very still and very quiet, which I think is what she does when she realizes the thing she'd planned hasn't worked. She tried to say the letter wasn't what it looked like. I told her that the attorney in Middlesboro had seen it and thought otherwise. She stopped talking after that. The drive back to Lexington was theirs to deal with. I stayed at the kitchen table after they left, with Cooper on the floor at my feet and the last of the coffee going cold in the pot. The afternoon light came in sideways through the window over the sink, the same window Loretta used to stand at when she did dishes, looking out at the yard. The attorney helped me put some protections in place over the following weeks. I updated my will with a different estate attorney. Someone Owen found, nobody connected to Shane or Gwen. I had the land put into a trust. I had the locks on the barn replaced with something more serious. None of it was complicated, legally speaking. It was just things I should have done 2 years ago when Loretta died, instead of letting grief make me slow. Shane called me about 3 weeks after that Saturday. It was not 9 o'clock. It was a Sunday morning, early, and he sounded like he hadn't slept well. He said he and Gwen were in counseling. He said he'd done a lot of thinking about the kinds of questions he should have been asking and hadn't asked. He said he was sorry. He didn't make excuses, which I appreciated more than I expected to. I told him I needed some time. He said he understood. We've spoken a few more times since then. Short calls. Careful, like two people crossing a frozen creek and testing the ice as they go. I don't know what it will look like in a year or 5 years. I know I'm not ready to have Gwen in my home again. I know I love my son, and that love doesn't have an off switch, even when you want one. What I know most clearly is this. Loretta saw it coming. She didn't panic. She didn't blow up the family with what she'd found. She prepared. She protected. She trusted me to find it when I needed to find it. And somehow, I think about this at night, sometimes, when the house is quiet. Somehow that broken padlock on the barn was the thing that led me exactly there. I don't know if I believe in signs. I believe in my wife. I believe she was careful even at the end. Careful in ways I'm still discovering. The cedar chest is back inside the house now. I didn't want to leave it in the barn. I keep it at the foot of the bed, same side Loretta slept on. Some mornings I put my hand on it when I walk past, the way she used to put her hand on the trunk of that old white oak on the ridge. Cooper follows me everywhere now, which the vet says is a dog's way of understanding that something in the house has changed. Maybe so. I let him sleep at the foot of the bed. Loretta always said no dogs in the bedroom, and I always agreed, and now I've broken that rule, and I think she'd probably let it go this once. The 9 o'clock calls have stopped. Some nights the quiet still gets loud, but it's a different kind of quiet now. It's the kind that belongs to me. I've had a lot of time to sit with what happened, and the thing that keeps coming back to me isn't the betrayal itself. It's the sequence of it, how one thing led to another, how Gwen's calls felt like care until they didn't, how the broken padlock on a barn I'd been avoiding for months turned out to be the thread that unraveled everything. I don't think that's an accident. I think that's how things work when you're paying attention. Here's what I've come to understand. People who mean you harm rarely announce it. They come in through the side door. They use the language of concern, of family, of practicality. They ask small things first, then slightly larger things, counting on the fact that you're tired or lonely or simply don't want to make trouble. And if you're grieving, which I was, deeply in ways I still can't always name, you become easier to move slowly in a direction you'd never choose if you were standing on solid ground. That's not weakness, that's being human, but it's also something worth seeing clearly. What Loretta did, the letter, the copied documents, the highlighted statute, all of it folded quietly into that cedar chest. That wasn't luck. That was a woman who had thought things through with a clear head when I wasn't able to. She didn't act out of fear. She acted out of knowledge and care and a kind of patient courage that I don't think I fully understood until I was sitting on that barn floor reading her handwriting. The lesson I take from that isn't complicated, but it's hard to practice. Clarity is something you build before you need it, not after. Loretta built it during what must have been a frightening and uncertain time, and she left it for me to find when my own clarity had failed. That kind of foresight, that kind of love is what I think of now when I hear the word strength. And then there's Owen, my brother-in-law, who said 4 words, "Don't sign anything yet," and meant exactly that, without drama, without panic. He'd spent 30 years watching paper move through a county clerk's office, and he understood what certain documents in certain hands could do. His steadiness that morning was the second thing that saved me. I think about how often we overlook the people in our lives who are simply, reliably clear-headed. They're not flashy about it. They don't announce themselves. But when you need someone to hold the line with you, they're already there. As for Shane, I've thought about my son more than I've thought about anything else in these past months. I think there's something important in the fact that he cried at that kitchen table. Not because crying proves anything, but because it told me he'd been carrying something too, even if he hadn't let himself see it for what it was. It takes a certain kind of honesty to sit across from your father and stop defending yourself. I don't know what Shane's path looks like from here. I know I'm watching it carefully, and I know I still love him, and I know those two things can be true at the same time. What I'd tell anyone who finds themselves in a version of this situation is simple. Trust the feeling that something is off, even when you can't prove it yet. Ask questions. Update your documents. Talk to the Owen in your life. And don't let grief or loneliness convince you that accepting less than you deserve is the same as keeping the peace. It isn't. The cedar chest is at the foot of my bed now. Cooper sleeps nearby. The land is protected. And I am, for the first time in a long time, not waiting for a phone call.